So what I want to do is bring in Councillor Sam Tarry, who's a Labour councillor for Barking and Dagenham, and was also on the steering group for Momentum, and he joins us now from Westminster. Sam Tarry, thanks very much for coming in. We've heard lots from Jess Phillips and indeed from Chris Leslie here about their concerns about this result. Why don't you give us your perspective of how you think Labour's done overnight and where it stands today?
Well, look, I mean, clearly Scotland's very difficult, and I think no matter who is the leader of the Labour Party, that was always going to be a very, very tough call. Across the country, you know, from the Midlands right through to the south coast, from Hastings up to Derby, including places like Norwich, Ipswich, and actually those key places of Harlow and Crawley, Labour have actually held on or moved forward. And I think that after the week and after actually the incessant comments and attacks by people like Michael Duggar and by people like Jess Phillips, you know, consistently going on the press to attack Corbyn, actually he's moved forward. People clearly do want to actually listen and hear that message that Corbyn has got, that is actually offering some hope and that actually is having resonance in so-called Middle England. I think that's really interesting. Come to London, absolutely stonking results. I mean, we just saw Unmesh Desai there winning nearly 90,000 majority. Admittedly, yes, it's a Labour stronghold, but across the piece, it looks like nearly a 10% or more swing to Sadiq and to Labour, potentially Labour's best ever result on the GLA. And across the piece as well, turnout levels up. That huge enthusiasm for Jeremy, if we're honest, hasn't actually been found right the way across the country, but it has, in many key places, played a really pivotal role. You look at Clive Lewis out in Norwich, knocking out the Greens, just absolutely devastating their representation on Norwich Council. And then here in London, huge increases in activism and people on the streets. And the reality is, the Tories set up the campaign in London as this so-called experiment, Corbyn experiment, you know, that Sadiq would be Corbyn's man in City Hall. The reality is that both Sadiq is his own man and actually Corbyn is hugely popular in London. They've utterly failed. And the desperation of what was frankly one of the most appalling and racist campaigns that the Conservatives have ever run in the last 30 years, I think has had a resounding kickback from Londoners who said that kind of nasty politics is not what we want in our capital city. And Labour have been handed an absolutely tremendous victory. I mean, I think it's actually a case in some of those places are now weighing the vote for Labour. And I think Sadiq has run a superb campaign and actually, you know, he's had to fight back against such an awful campaign that's turned off Londoners. And I think that hope and that inspiration that Jeremy's brought over the summer is actually there and actually really delivering for us in the streets in terms of people coming out campaigning, new activists getting out on the doorstep, and across the country, actually, despite the naysayers in the Labour Party who now have an awful lot to answer for, we've actually held on in really tough places and made some huge advances. And then the crowning glory in London, you know, Sadiq is going to be later today crowned the Mayor of London, and I think thank goodness he ran such a clean and decent campaign, standing up for every single Londoner, you know, with real policies that are actually going to change London for the better. And I think Zac Goldsmith, frankly, needs to hang his head in shame.
Very quickly, Sam, if I may, because we're up against the clock. Those people you call the naysayers, what they're saying rather seriously is that based on this performance, you are not heading, or likely to be heading, for a Labour victory at the general election in 2020. And that is the main thing, as far as they're concerned, to get Labour into power and put Labour policies into practice. Now, what do you say to them?
I think we're quite a long way off from the last general election. You know, we're not actually gone back, we've gone forward, apart from in Scotland. You know, that is a separate debate and discussion in itself. I think, actually, you know, from what those people were saying, perhaps if some of them had, you know, shut up and sort of put up or actually, you know, stop laying into Jeremy so much over the last few weeks, we've actually gone even further and actually held even more places. So they've got a lot to answer for. The reality is actually this is a process of building and this is actually a sure and steady step forward. And in London, obviously, it's a huge leap forward.
Councillor Sam Tarry, good of you to come in. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Pleasure.